I guess I got to say it, huh? Welcome to the World's Famous Adventurers Club. I haven't done an interview yet. But,
well done. You're hired.
So Peter and I are here tonight to talk about our trip to Port Isabel. Both of us are divers. We've been diving for forever. I think we met back in '83 or so. Both members of the California Wreck Divers, and we like to go out and dive shipwrecks. And, you know, as far as we're concerned, it's pretty much the only reason why you want to go diving.
Yeah.
Peter likes to get some game every once in a while. But one of the things we really enjoy, though, is doing the research, because a lot of times you have the historical record and you have a pile of junk or ruins, and when you put the two together, it really adds color or tangible history to the whole picture. You know, you're looking at a puzzle where a lot of pieces are missing, and you get to put in the pieces, and hopefully it tells a story. So a lot of times with both shipwrecks and we'll talk about tonight Port Isabel, you can research, maybe go out and find what you researched, or you find something and then you research it and try to identify it, and find out what it used to look like, its history, and so forth. So I think we're ready to start there, Phoebe. Mm-hmm. So this is the 1994. Next. And 1995. Next. Yeah. 1996. 1998. 2006.
Next.
Yeah. And finally, 2007 trip to Port Isabel. So as I mentioned, Peter and I, and Dave Finnern, who's not here with us tonight, he and I, we go out there to different sites, and mostly underwater and dive them. But this is Ehrenberg here off Arizona. So these are old seaports going back to the 1800s, and so we like to explore them, research them, find if there's anything, check them out. Next. Next. And here's the Sacramento River. We actually did a lot of diving. You see how good the water clarity is there. That's me in the foreground behind the piling.
We call those pilings Bart Simpson pilings.
Yeah.
Because of the grass growing out of the top of them looked like Bart Simpson.
Yeah. And you get down about 10 feet, it's pure black water. But we go down there and find a lot of old bottles and some other interesting things. Pretty neat. Next.
There.
This is St. Thomas and Lake Mead. This is shortly after Lake Mead's water level had dropped to the point where you actually see some of the ruins. This was a Mormon town built around the turn of the century, and once the water level dropped down low enough, you could actually see some of the ruins. Next. Here I am with this fancy new device at the time called GPS. Next. So sometime back in the early 90s, Dave Finnern, a buddy of mine, came up and said, "Hey, I got this map here. It shows this old ghost town, or this old seaport. And it's called Port Isabel, and it's middle of nowhere. It's an American port down there in Mexico, and nobody's ever been there." Next. So, what do you do when someone comes up with a map like that and with a story? It's like, you gotta go check it out. So here we are down there on our first trip. Next.
Who's the guy with the hair?
Yeah. My old Toyota pickup. There's Dave looking out there, and this place is just mud city, and it's not feasible. We're planning just driving right out there, and that's a four-wheel drive vehicle, and that's as far as we went, because you're in the middle of nowhere, and there's certainly no AAA down there. Next. Here's a close-up photograph of it. If you can see, there's an island there. It's called Montague Island. Immediately above it, you can see written Port Isabel. So that's where we're going. There's a confluence between two sloughs, and we were looking for whatever remained of that port.
Yeah, I should point out that this is in Mexico at the very top of the Sea of Cortez. It's the delta region of the Colorado River, and it's really a super fascinating area. It's about 1,200 square miles of, like this apocalyptic no man's land where, the silt, the water, the skyline, it all blends together, and you have these ghost ships sailing on the horizon, which is, it looks like ships sailing on the horizon, but it's a mirage of ships that are beyond the horizon, and they seem to be sailing across the desert. Then it's actually about 50 miles south of the international border, as a crow flies, but it's about 150 river miles from this area here, the confluence of Colorado River, to Yuma. So that kind of gives you an idea of where it's at. And the delta, as I said, it's 1,200 square miles, but it extends down to Sea of Cortez, underwater, another 200 miles. And just a really super dynamic area. Then, anyway.
Yeah, this is where the Colorado River met the ocean back in the day when there was water flowing through it. Next. So this is the trip Peter and I made.
Yeah.
And here we are crossing our railroad bridge, but that was the only way to get there. Next. So some initial aerial reconnaissance with the time what we had available to us. I think this is a forerunner to Google Maps. Trying to find some locations, and this was what we had thought was location of Port Isabel. Next. Turns out we were way off. And then came out with a good copy of Google Maps. Next. And so we could actually zoom in on it. Next. And we could actually compare the map to the sloughs out there. You see an arrow pointing there. Next.
And surprisingly, it hasn't changed that much in 150 years.
Yeah, and that was the drydock, which we'll see shortly.
Yeah.
And so we went down there again. Next. And here you see that little yellow dot in the upper left-hand corner. Next. Okay, that was the drydock that was there. So
Yeah.
Tom Odie and I went down there. Tom was another member of the Adventurers Club.
If we can go back one slide. Okay. So Steve pointed out the dry dock in the upper left, but down to the upper right, down to the lower right, you'll actually see kind of a triangular shape. That is a abandoned salt collection facility. The tides down there, you're usually talking about 20-foot tidal range. So it's a very flat area. So through a system of dikes and levees, these tidal pools would flood, the water would evaporate, and then they would scrape the salt off, for commercial reasons, and scrape the salt and collect the salt. That's now been abandoned, but that whole area is a UNESCO biosphere. So when you look at the UNESCO biosphere, it's all, that whole area is included except for the salt works. It's kind of carved out. But all that salt production moved down the Cortez to another island, Bahia Salinas, on an island close to Loreto. But anyway, that doesn't have anything to do with with the ships here. So anyway.
Next. So Tom and I get down there, and it's impassable given the water, given the incoming tide. Next. Here's a close-up of the dry dock. So now we have an accurate picture of what we can expect to find, plus accurate GPS coordinates. So now we had a...
Yeah, it's a graving dock.
Yeah. Next.
Graving dry dock.
So here's another picture of where we were. Next. So this is about, I think that's Tom's truck up there, and we started walking on the mud and couldn't get very far. Next. So this is the course we're going to try and take. Climb down from the bluff above, walk a couple miles out there on the floodplain, and hopefully get there. Next. And this area is one of the weirdest places on Earth, and it's a total wasteland. There's just nothing there at all. It's just a floodplain. Next. Here's, I think it was a log, kind of leaving a trail. This is kind of reminiscent of the racetrack at Death Valley. You know, in this case, it was the tide carrying something around and leaving marks in the sand, or the mud.
Yeah. As Steve said, this is all, from the Colorado River, and as the Colorado flows, some of this debris could be coming down from as far north as Utah, but as the waters tend to slow and disperse into the Sea of Cortez, it's like a riffle. So the heavier objects get dropped out first, medium objects, so on and so forth, until you had nothing but this silt left in the river water, and that's what's built up here. So we're at the very bottom of the Colorado River, and there's no pebbles, there's no rocks, nothing except silt, which comes into play later on, as you'll see.
This is where the Grand Canyon ended up. Next.
Right, all the debris that's been carried down to Colorado from, I think, 6 or 7 states get deposited here.
And it creates some interesting patterns. Next. And those are actually, looks like cotton balls with salt. It's crystallized on top of the mud there. Next. That is what looks like a railroad tie. Next. And I'll show you another picture here. We kicked it and just fell apart like fiberglass. There's some footprints, just on the mud that we walked through. Next. It's just kind of interesting no man's land. Next.
Yeah, it's when it gets wet, it's like peanut butter. It's the best way to describe it.
Next.
Was that a pelican?
Looked like it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so here's, what do you do with this worthless
Yeah.
land? You make it a natural refuge. I don't know why, but nothing there really worth protecting. Next. Yeah, there's that what looked like a railroad tie. Kicked it, just fell apart because of the, I guess, the salt in it, but it was really odd. Next. Next. Here you
Those are coyote tracks.
Yeah, and probably some fresh water there. What's really weird, though, in this environment, typically you'll have fresh water on top of salt water because the fresh water is lighter. In this environment, it's actually opposite, where the fresh water is seeping down into the mud below, and the salt water is coming in with the tides on the floodplain. Next. And here I am, sinking into the mud. Can't really tell, but this is, it gets to be a boot-sucking mud. Next. This guy didn't have a chance.
Yeah.
Next. So there's Tom, and he's all prepared. He has his waders, his metal detector, and all his tools and everything. Well, he didn't get very far. Next. He found some interesting things. It's an older bottle. Next. And he's holding up a purple bottle, which is due to manganese, which is usually the 1800s era bottle. Next.
What was the round object? Was that a float?
Oh, yeah, a fishing float, yeah.
Glass
Yeah.
float, yeah.
Yeah. On the side of the river, on the embankment there, you notice these shells. Didn't think anything of it, but later on realized those are Indian middens. So this is where the local Native Americans would go down and grab some shells and eat them and leave the shells behind on the riverbanks there. Next.
Which tribes?
No idea. Next. So, okay, we got to do some more research and planning. Next. So the story of the Colorado River in Port Isabel is that in 1847, Brigham Young settles in Mormons in the northern Utah. 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo. What's interesting is that the vessels and citizens of the United States shall have at all times a free and uninterrupted passage by the Gulf of California by the River Colorado. I wonder if they held that today. They probably say, yeah, as long as you send us some water. 1849, of course, discovery of gold in California brings immigrants into the area. Next. So here's a map of what is now Yuma. It's the confluence of the Gila and the Colorado River. And in 1850, they established a military camp there.
It was still a territory. It wouldn't become a state for another 61 years.
It was actually, I think in 1850, still Mexican territory. We didn't have the Gadsden Purchase yet.
Right.
Next. So here's a camp at Fort Yuma, 1852, and there's a ferry boat that they pull back and forth across the Colorado River. Next. So in 1852, the Uncle Sam 65-foot side wheeler was actually constructed in San Francisco, and they reassembled on site, the first steamer to navigate the Colorado River. 52 to 64, the Colorado Steam Navigation Company has a monopoly on the river. And then 1853, the Gadsden Purchase makes Yuma, Arizona, American territory. And then sometime back in the 1850s, Port Isabel was named after the schooner Isabel. And here we see a ad for transportation from San Francisco down to Yuma, Arizona. Next. So the little iron-hulled, 50-foot long Explorer was built in Philadelphia. They shipped it around the Cape Horn, and then I think they actually went to San Francisco and then back around to Sea Cortez. They shipped it to the mouth of the Colorado River. Oh, Panama Isthmus, I'm sorry. Described as a waterborne wheelbarrow. Ives and the Explorer left the Gulf of California to find the limits of the navigable Colorado River on the end of December 1857. And there's a little bit more story to this too, where you want to talk about that, Peter?
Yeah. She was, the vessel was originally a iron steamboat. She was contracted to Rene and Neffy and Company of Philadelphia and was built for $25,000. The sea trial, when she was initially built, took place on the Delaware River, and revealed two major design flaws. The heavy hull was not rigid enough to accommodate the huge 3-ton boiler nestled amidships, nor could it handle the torque generated by the 9-foot stern paddle wheel. In an act of either stupidity or sheer incompetence, Lieutenant Eves found the unseaworthy steamboat satisfactory. He disassembled her, had her ship knocked down from New York to San Francisco via Panama in San Francisco. She was loaded onto the schooner Monterey, and which set sail on November 1st, 1857, arriving on November 30th at Robinson's Landing. A 5-foot trench was dug in the mud, 50 feet long, 14 feet wide, within which the Explorer was assembled. To mitigate the problems that they were having with hull flex, they drilled 60 hand-drilled holes through the iron to attach massive timbers to the outside of the hull for longitudinal strength. Additional wood stringers were added within the hull to mitigate the sagging, and little thought was given to the craft's handling or draft. The bow was decked over with a 4-pound howitzer, mounted atop a 7-foot by 8-foot cabin, which was built between the paddle wheel and the boiler. Anyway, do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, sure. So, but they actually had an ulterior motive to go up the Colorado River. The Mormons were getting a little out of hand there, especially after the Mountain Meadow Massacre the same year. So they're trying to find another way in closer to that area of the territory at the time. And there was a competitor there. It was a Jensen who had the General Jessup, another steamer, who lost the bid to actually go up there on the river. But because he was frustrated with losing the bid, he decided that if I can't have the money, I have the glory. So he beat them up there. And it was the first steamer to navigate up the Colorado River up to, I think, what is now Black Canyon, which is not too far from where Hoover Dam is. Next. So here's a map of California and early Arizona territory. Next. So here we have Black Canyon. If you notice, you see Roaring Rapids. We'll talk about in a minute. There's also, if you see there in the center, Explorer's Rock. So the Explorer made it far up the river until it hit a rock, which was subsequently named Explorer's Rock after the small steamer, and it still retains that name today. Next.
Yeah, it was right below Squaws Peak on the Colorado is where she hit, and she couldn't advance any further. The Lieutenant Ives was his name, who was in charge of the expedition. He portaged and rowed a boat further up the, or, probably just a skiff further up the Colorado to approximately where Hoover Dam is today, which was Boulder Dam. So even though Johnson got the credit for going up the river, being the first one to explore to navigable headwaters of the Colorado River, Ives was the first one to actually survey it, and he had paleontologists, he had zoologists, biologists on board, and they did an excellent job. He made charts of the Colorado River, and he actually wrote a book on it, and it's just a really rather fascinating story. I have the name of the book here somewhere. Anyway, I'll find it and Report upon the Colorado River of the West. So even though, again, Johnson got the credit for, going up to the headwaters, Eves, he named a lot of the points. For example, now you'll see Carroll's Creek, Mount Newberry, Mount Whipple's Crossing. These are all named for officers that were on this expedition, and the names are still assigned to those landmarks.
So in the 1860s, the Explorer was sold, and they used it for a barge, kind of utilitarian purposes, and then it got swept away in a flood. In 1929, almost 70 years later, they found it down in Mexico in the middle of the desert. Next. Here's a picture of it. You can see there in the center the location where they found it. So that's, from Yuma, it's probably about a good 50 miles by river. The Colorado River actually carried the Explorer south. Next.
Yeah, she was the only iron riverboat that was on the Colorado. All the others, they were wood hulls.
Yeah. So here's a picture, or pictures of it after discovery in 29. The Mexicans found that her iron hull was good for cooking tortillas. So they subsequently took it apart, and I think just left some bare ribs. Next. And you can see that back then the Colorado River is pretty happening, and there's a lot of mines, a lot of stopovers, small pier sites, and they had a lot of activity going on the river that time. Next. And here we see the roaring rapids again in the Colorado. Next. This is what it looks like today. It's obviously a lot calmer because it's south of Lake Mead. Next. Yeah, you can still see what they call the ringbolt rapids. Those were rings that they installed in the sides of the river so they can actually winch themselves up the narrow channels of the river, so that they could get by some of these faster areas that they couldn't steam through.
Yeah, most of the riverboats that were built with a flat bottom, a scow bottom, they had no keel. Through a system of trusses and turnbuckles is how they kept their original torsion or rigidness. And they only had a draft like 2 or 3 feet, and it wasn't so much the center of the channel. The center of the channel was often 6+ feet deep, but in order to dock or come into these landings, they needed a much shallower draft vessel, and so and they were almost all stern wheelers. The paddle wheel guards on a side wheeler would prevent them from pulling abreast of landings.
Yeah, and this is going 150, almost 200 years. You can see those rings on the side of the Colorado River today. Next. So this is kind of interesting. So at one point in time, they're actually going to build a railroad down to Port Isabel and beyond, starting from Yuma. And if you look down below the very last lines here, and it's with the directors were, oh, I'm sorry, it's the wrong article. Yeah, oh, this is the next, okay, yeah, so that's the talk about the arrival at Calville. So Calville, which is now under Lake Mead, I think it's a Mormon settlement back in the late 1800s. And what, by the time it was abandoned here in 1930, when they started flooding for Lake Mead, it looks like this now. Next. So here we have military supply routes. Next. There's a close-up. You can see the dotted line go up the Colorado River. So the QMD was the quartermaster depot, and it's the confluence, the Gila and the Yuma rivers, or the Colorado River at Yuma. Next. So they had a number of steamers there. Here's the Kokan. Next. And you see a steamer there next to a barge. Next. It's where they could, essentially have two vessels in one steam boiler and an engine. Next. Here we see a picture here for an ad for the Colorado Steam Navigation Company. Next. I like this picture here. So they're loading up supplies. If you look carefully on those boxes there, the lower left-hand corner, you'll see they say dynamite. So it's just stacked up there. Next. Here's some of the miners heading up north. Next. So you look carefully at some of these people on board, they're Indians. And they'd often give them free rides on the steamer up and down the Colorado River. Next. Here's the Cocopa. This actually ended up in Port Isabel. They just abandoned it and used it as a barracks or a building. Next. Yeah.
And unlike ocean-going side wheel steamers, these river boats, very sparse accommodations. Often it was too hot to be in a stateroom, such as they were. People would sleep out on deck, and apparently it was quite miserable. No luxuries at all. It was pretty bare bones. What you see is what you get here.
And this picture,
very utilitarian.
I find incredible because I hope this is like December, because anybody's out to Arizona, you got triple-digit heat out there, and look what they're wearing. The men are wearing tie and the vests. Women are wearing long dresses. I just can't imagine wearing that kind of dress in the Arizona heat. Next. And it's pretty warm down there. Like here we have an account from a woman who lived down there in 1874. The wind was like a breath from a furnace. It seemed as though the days would never end. The wind never stopped blowing. Jack's official diary says, "One soldier died a day." We had staterooms, but could hardly remain in them, as Peter described, because of the intense heat. The fare was meager. The metal handles on the knives were uncomfortably warm to the touch. And even the wooden arms of the chairs felt as they were going to ignite. Pretty graphic description. Next. But in total, there are about 30 vessels that operated on the Colorado River between 1852 and 1907.
And about a third of them were wrecked on the Colorado River as well. And what they would do when a vessel wrecked, they would build up another vessel from its usable parts. So, like you had the Cocopa 1 to Cocopa 2, and that was when the Cocopa wrecked. They would take the boiler and, as Steve once said, or recently said, they'd jack up the steam whistle and slide another ship underneath it. So.
Next. So here's the route they would take. Leave from San Francisco and maybe touch the San Diego and completely navigate around Baja California up the Sea of Cortez to Port Isabel. Next. Here's some advertisements. Here's a photograph of one of those ocean-going steamers that would go between San Francisco and Port Isabel. This is actually here off Palos Verdes. This is the Newbern. This is shipwrecked. Peter and I have dived many times. And that wrecked in, I think, 1894.
It's right off of what's now Terranea.
It used to be Marineland. It's called the Marineland wreck for a long time. Next. So the railroad, Southern Pacific, reached Yuma in 1877, and after that period of time, it cut freight rates, so they basically dismantled Port Isabel that period of time, 1878, 1879. Next. Here's the articles referred to. So you see here, they're going to, kind of interesting, put a railroad down to Guaymas through Port Isabel from Yuma. Actually looking for investors here, but what I think is really interesting in this article, you just see Charles Crocker, George Crocker, probably a relative, Timothy Hopkins, Huntington, and Leland Stanford. This represents the California Four that built the Transcontinental Railroad. And Hopkins was a different one, but probably a relative of the original Hopkins, the California Four. So, next. So what we able to find as far as documentation of Port Isabel is an American port operated by Americans, including the military and foreign land, lacked any type of food and supplies. It's a transitory town housing maybe 100 to 300 people. Mentioned only briefly in a handful of Colorado River history publications. And there's only perhaps a dozen or so photographs of Port Isabel known to exist. Next. So here's a photograph of the schooner Isabel, which I believe sailed out of San Francisco, and they're in a slough down there. And there's appears to be a smaller vessel in between the schooner and this steamer. I think is probably
a lighter.
Yeah, a Cocan or Cocopah there. But the schooner worked its way into protected waters in the slough, allowing the steamer to transship the cargo from there. Now, if you notice that structure there on the left, I think there's a small cross on there. Next. Yeah, and so you can see here on the map, they actually have cross, which is the opening to that. And because it's just flat, and you have no references, there's no mountains or trees close by, or any type of vertical structure, they erected that cross so you can actually navigate and find your way into the slough.
Yeah. It's an aid to navigation tower.
Yeah. Next. So here we see one of the steamers, and as Peter described, they pull up alongside the riverbank. You really can't pull up a side wheeler that well, like along the riverbank, without damaging the wheel. Next. Here's a picture of Port Isabel. That is the Cocopah in the background, which was basically used as a barracks or housing. Just kind of took the old vessel and stuck it there. You see the dry dock there, and they're either it's a barge or they're building a vessel in the dry dock. They basically use the tidal flow there to fill and drain the dry dock. Next. Using the picture.
Yeah, Cocopah was named after an Indian tribe, indigenous tribe to the area.
Mm.
Then.
Next. I think that's the Cocopah, but you'll see it there on the dry dock. And you can see, like Peter described, the draft. Only a couple feet, very, very shallow vessels. Next. Here's probably the opposite view from the stern. You see the slough in the foreground. You can see some buildings there. Next. So by 1871, they had a Wells Fargo's office, a North Pacific Steamship Company office, bank, warehouse facilities, with regular service from San Francisco pretty much every 3 weeks. Next. So, Dave initially told me, he said, no one's been there. Well, turns out it wasn't quite the case. The known expeditions to visit the site, 1891, there's Godfrey Sykes visited. His grandson visited in 1975. Said he found evidence of other people checking out the site as well. Next. I found an article in 1962 in Desert Magazine, and the quote, "I'll never do that again." Peter and I can agree with that. Next. And there's Joan Myers wrote the book Salt Dreams about the area, and she actually went out there in 91. But I reached out to her, and she was able to provide maps of Sykes' earlier visits. Next. So those maps came in handy. Next. See a close-up here. Now, the maps, including the original one, show two sites. We show kind of like the confluence of two sloughs that had Port Isabel, and we have the shipyard off to the side. Next. The site is also seismically quite active. And you mentioned here's an earthquake, shock and earthquake last night, rather this morning, 3 o'clock. broke a schooner from this morning's. Next. So what else we've noticed here is kind of interesting. Typically in nature, you don't see straight lines, but we did here. Next. And you can see a straight line going from diagonally across up to the lake in the upper left-hand corner.
That's the Salton Sea.
Yes.
Up there.
I think that's still Mexico. But it does go up there, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
But we're looking at the North American and Pacific plates. So the slough that led in front of Port Isabel was actually the juncture of the two plates coming together. And it was created by those two plates.
It's the San Andreas Fault.
Yeah.
It's which is actually what separated Baja from, mainland Mexico. But San Andreas Fault runs right up there, which explains why, when Steve and I and Dave were there, we were saying, why is the slough still here? It's not dredged. You don't have active. It's not an active river channel. Why is it here? And then we realized we're actually walking on the San Andreas Fault, and as the plates move, it creates this depression. And when you pull further out, I don't know if Steve has another picture, but when you pull further out, you can actually see,
Next.
Points. Next.
Yeah, here you go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you can actually see points of, water and displacement heading in a northwest direction. And the other end, where it re-enters the Pacific Ocean, is right up at Cliff House in San Francisco by the Golden Gate.
But here you can see, had it not been for the Colorado River depositing all the silt and sediment, the northern end of the Sea of Cortez would be at the northern end of the Salton Sea, where it is today.
Yeah, it would actually be at Palm Springs. Yeah.
Next.
Then.
So went to UNLV. They have a lot of photographs, research material. Here's a picture from 1975 showing the dry dock and the cocoa paw, or what's left of it, and the slough in front of it. Next. We went out to Yuma, Arizona, looked at some of the museum stuff they have there, some research. Next. There's another wreck here on the Colorado River to the north. This is the Charles Spencer, and this is what it looked like shortly after its abandonment. And you can see the picture down the bottom, what it looks like today. It was used shortly for a mining operation up there. Next. So we came up with a plan. So we decided that we're going to launch out there. You see the arrow in the lower right-hand corner. Transit the channel by boat, and then go up the slough to as far as we can get, and then walk up to the shipyard. Because we knew that there's something there at the shipyard. We couldn't say anything at the site of Port Isabel. We're going to go check it out anyway. Next. Here's a close-up of it. So next. So plugged in all the coordinates in the GPS. Went down there. Next. One of the things that we had problems with in the past was the tides. The tides are about 20 feet down there. They're huge. So as you can see here on the 16th and the 17th, you have a minimal tidal exchange. So that's the weekend we went down. Next.
Before they built the dams, Hoover Dam and Parker Dam, et cetera, and contained the Colorado River, there used to be huge tidal bores that would race up to Colorado. And these tidal bore waves were anywhere from 10, 15, depending upon the phase of the moon, up to 20 feet high. And you'd have what caused them was the water flowing down the Colorado River, meeting the incoming tide, and the flow of the water pushing against the incoming tide, and the incoming tide trying to push against the flowing river, until finally the incoming tide rides up and over the fresh water and surges inland up to 50 miles, inland. And quite a few vessels have been lost, due to that surge. And maybe I can talk about the Topolobampo a little bit later, but we'll get back to the tidal surge. But
So back in November 2007, our trip begins next. So Dave and I are here.
oh, this is dinner. This is
Yeah.
dinner of champions.
Yeah. Cronin chips, yeah, next. Next, okay. So we were cruising down there, got lost, and some federales offered to show us where to go. Next. Here's the slough we're gonna launch, next. Obviously, it's salt water there, see the jellyfish, next. So Tom actually gave me this boat, and surprisingly, during the whole time we were out there, it held air. Dave and I are here with the club flag, expedition flag, next. Here, Peter and I are in the boat, motoring out there, next. So we enter the slough, we see the arrow down there, and try to head up the narrow channel, next.
Great picture of the salt operation, by the way.
So we went up as far as we could go, and this was about it. We ran out of water, next. So we started hopping up the riverbank or the side of the slough there, next. Pull the boat up, make sure it didn't float away in the next high tide, next.
You can see how much water or how little water there is in the slough right there.
Yeah, it gives you an idea of the tile exchange.
Yeah.
Next. And we're just out in the middle of nowhere. Next. Next. So we started heading up to where Port Isabel was indicated on the map. Next.
Dave and Steve.
Next. So you can see the Port Isabel is kind of like the confluence there of the slough, and the shipyard is up probably about a mile north of the location. Next. So we're going to look for Port Isabel there, see if there's anything there. There's Dave. Ain't nothing here except for this guy. Next. There was a storm up there a couple weeks, I think, down in Baja, a couple weeks prior, and you think that some unfortunate fisherman or sailor or something out there in the water. He had a jacket on at the time. Probably drowned, and because of the extreme tides and the current, that's where he washed up. Next. And looks like some dogs or coyotes got to him.
Yeah, it was interesting because the coyotes had come up to him and checked him out, but we'd found bodies in Baja before. This one, shows a great deal of atrophy, but it's still articulated. I was looking for a wreck down off of Punta Tosco once, and it had been driven ashore. I was walking along the shore in really remote area, and found a torso, a human torso, in a sea cave, and then looking for the Union, the sidewheel steamer Union, wrecked in 1851. Came across disarticulated bodies on that one as well, strewn along the beach, and we think those were actually buried there. There were 60 people that lost their lives in that accident, in that shipwreck, and some of them were buried in sailcloth on the shoreline. So, it's just part of nature, Anyway. Was not expecting to find this poor guy out there, though.
Next. So, as Peter described, this mud is like peanut butter. I've never been in one of those mud spas, but if you wanted to get some mud for that, this is it, because there's no grit, it's very smooth, it's very fine, and you can see how deep it is. Next.
That's probably not a view of Steve you'd want to normally take a photo of.
Yeah, no wisecracks, please.
But again, this is all just silt, the last remaining sediment in the Colorado River. As the water slows, it just deposits there, and all the heavier sediment is, upriver, further up and you're left with this, we say peanut butter, peanut butter mud.
Yeah, so by the time we got back to the boat, tide continued to go out a little further, so we had to push it back a few hundred feet to get to some deeper water. So then we went down the slough, and then we went up to the right on the edge of that salt evaporating pond, or whatever you want to call it, to where you see the exit of the boat, and begin walking there. It's about 2 miles to the dry dock. Next. So here we are. And got my GPS and pictures and trying to take some bearings. There's Peter just caked in mud. Next.
Hose me off.
Yeah, there's Dave. He's also caked in mud. Yeah, just mud everywhere. Next.
Tenacious. It gets into everything.
Yeah. So we started walking. Next.
The scale in nature, is the same, regardless, or the laws of nature, are regardless of the scale. Like this looks like the Grand Canyon here. So you have these big giants, Steve and Dave walking there, but actually the lip, might be only about a foot or two, there. But it looks just like the Grand Canyon.
Next. And again, a tree, I think, left some.
Oh, this is really cool. Yeah, this is really cool. We're walking. We saw these tracks coming across the mud in front of us from east to west, and we go, what in the world caused that? And so anyway, we walk about another mile, and then we see the tracks again crossing, and we're heading north, and the tracks again are crossing from west to east, and except now we can see what's causing it. And if you look carefully, you'll see like a bush or a small tree stump. Anyway, it's just like the racetrack at Death Valley where the rocks go across this dry lake bed, this lake bed of sediment that when it gets wet, it gets very slippery, very high viscosity. And it's the same thing, it's just the wind that was blowing this object that had enough surface area to catch the wind, blew it across the mud, and then the wind shifted and it kept sliding across the mud, just due to the wind.
Next.
It's Dave and Steve.
Next. Here's a slough in front of Port Isabel. Next.
Which is San Andreas Fault.
Here's our path. Next. So finally, after a couple miles walking, we made it there. Next. Here I am walking into the dry dock.
Godzilla.
Yeah, it looks like a creature from the Michael
Godzilla the mud.
Yeah, here's another picture. It's remnants of a building, along with a looks like a mooring ball. Next. It's a dry dock. Next. Dry dock. Next.
Plainly see the outline of the dry dock.
Yeah. It's part of the berm. You can see some remnants of glass and some other things in there. It's amazing how much, given the tide that goes in and out of here, how much of that still remains. Next. Here's a photograph of what it looked like back in the 1870s. You see the cocoa pod there in the distance. Next. Kind of a then and now picture. Next. Some remnants of some of the wood buildings. Next. Next. Just junk in the sand. Next. It's hard to imagine some of these posts have been upright for 130 years.
Yeah.
Next.
And it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when people say it's a shipwreck, it's a time capsule. You're capturing a moment in time when the ship sinks. Well, it's similar to this port here. When a ship sinks, yes, at that particular moment it is a time capsule, but nature is reclaiming it, and ships break down, cargo breaks down, everything breaks down. This is in a very acidic environment. The wood is all but gone. The brass even is coming apart. Everything is returning to its molecular level. So anyway, I just wanted to voice my view on it.
Next.
subject.
Here's some like the brass that Peter's talking about. You get a lot of the zinc's been leached out of it and heavily corroded. There's a bottle there on the left, or remnants of one. Next. Here's a bottle.
Yeah,
Next.
glass bottle.
Here's Peter holding bottle. Next. Next.
Not much identifiable there.
Yeah. Next. It's a collapsed building. Next. 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 Here's like a what they call the cathedral pickle bottle there, or remnants of one right there in the lower hand corner. Next. Next.
Would have been a nice bottle.
Yeah, same here. You see that's a ply top, it's hand blown. Next. I think that's part of the mooring ball, the lower part of it. Next. Next.
This is all that's left of the buildings.
Yeah. Next. There's Dave and I with the expedition flag for the trip. Next. There's the building out there. Next. This is what's remnants of the Kokopah, the steamer they beached up there. There's part of a boiler. Next. This is in Yuma. There's a museum there. You can see the boiler from the steamers they dredged up or salvaged. Next. Next. I thought this was kind of interesting. There's actually what they call hogging cables that go on steamers, and they keep it from hogging by keeping the posts and some heavy cables, and it keeps it from sagging in the middle. So this is all that's left of the Kokopah, along with the boiler. Next. Yeah, those are the cables.
Yeah, we were hoping to find part of the Topolobampo when we were walking around, but it was all gone. But as I mentioned earlier, the area has had numerous shipwrecks, but the most deadly one was in 1922 with the steamer Topolobampo. It had about 84 passengers, 40 crew members on board. These were farmers and crop workers that were coming up to Yuma, and the captain went into the slough over by Robinson's Landing. Normally they would anchor offshore and come in onto high tide. Anyway, it was in the evening. He came in onto high tide rather than anchoring offshore, anchored into slough. Water went out. He sat on the mud bottom. Then when the tide rose and you had the incoming tide, it came in with a tidal bore wave that was 20 feet tall, hit the ship broadside, and she capsized and rolled in the barrel of the wave, and there was about 100 people that were unfortunately killed in that accident. That was one of the deadliest shipwrecks in Baja that have occurred in Baja.
Next.
But we found no trace of her.
So here's the last picture we took of the site. Started walking back. Next.
Yeah,
So they motored back. Next.
that's actually a pretty cool picture.
Yeah, just caked in mud. Next. Next.
That's the bottom. That's the bottom of of the inflatable.
Yeah.
Don't speed through it. Tell them what they're looking at.
Yeah, everything.
Can you go back one?
Yeah.
Okay, what are we looking at there?
That's the fuel tank and the bottom of the inflatable. For their feet. Yeah.
And a couple legs,
Yeah.
a couple feet with about 4 inches of mud in the bottom of the boat.
Yeah. Next. Yeah, so I had a handheld photometer there. It was the yellow thing. and my GPS I had to keep clean. It's hard to do. Your hands all muddy.
That got us home. That got us
Yeah.
home because we ran out of daylight. It was night, and we were out there underwater, and there is no landmarks. There's no aid to navigation. There's nothing.
There's no light. Yeah.
No
It was just
light.
Pitch black. Next.
It wasn't just dark. It was dark black.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is that's one of Peter's favorite pictures.
Yeah, one of my favorite pictures. I have reams of photos from Baja. I'd done, so many trips to Baja, and that, for some reason, this is such a nice sunset. It's just
Well, and the
really.
guy in the foreground too is not too bad.
Oh, yeah.
But
Steve and I have been diving together for 43 years, and for us, we're not diving for the sake of diving. We love shipwrecks. We're shipwreck divers, and it's the shipwreck that is the fascinating. The diving portion is only the vehicle to get us to the shipwreck. But we'd had some incredible adventures over the years, but this was a really good one. And
so after 13 years, coming back with a smile, we've been there, we found it finally, and like the article said, I don't think we'll ever go back.
yeah.
Next. That's it.
Okay.
Any questions?
Ready to go back?
No plans, no.
I would actually like to go back. But
Well, if you went, maybe if you had a hovercraft, you're perfect. So you can just go on top of the mud.
yeah.
I'm enamored by your 43 years, right? So 43 years is a long time. What started that? And I mean, that's a very sweet.
What started?
long-term friendship? Yeah, that's very sweet.
For me, Steve and I, we were talking about it. For me, it was, I started free diving when I was 11 years old. I'm now 67 years old. So I've been in the water a long time. And then free diving, I found that shipwrecks held a lot of fish. And so I would look for fish on shipwrecks. I would look for shipwrecks to find fish. Well, then I found my first porthole, and it completely flip-flopped. Now I was looking for shipwrecks. That was just, a light came on. It was just one of those moments in your life that changes your life. And, I'd found hundreds of shipwrecks in Baja. In Baja, I have about 200,000 logged miles, air, sea, and land. It's the Pathfinder that Steve showed earlier. That one I had logged about 70,000 miles just in Baja before we finally, got rid of it. But it will come back with the headlights taped up sometimes and things falling off it. But anyway, it was always the draw of the shipwrecks and the history of the shipwrecks and the researching. And as Steve said, the effort going into it, knowing the history of the vessel and then finding it. That's what started me. And
Yeah, I started off in high school as an armchair treasure hunter and got certified and went out and did my first wreck dive. And I came up with a brass handheld kerosene lamp, a glass chimney, and I was hooked. I found treasure. But what really attracted me to it was the history, and I started digging into the wreck that I had dived on, and just found, you have the physical record, you have the historical record. So often history is told, in facts, figures. Rarely you have any photographs, maybe an oil painting, what happened. But I really enjoy matching up the historical record with the physical record, and the stories behind it, the history. Peter and I belonged to the same dive club, the California Wreck Divers, for many years. And through that club, we were able to go on dives together. We charter boats. We had a number of banquets. We had Mel Fisher, Teddy Tucker, Bob Marks, even James Cameron, thanks to Ralph White here, come speak at the dive club. And we all have just a passion for shipwrecks, and we share common interest and research, and very much enjoy it.
So the scale of the Colorado, I think we have a question here, but before it was dammed, the Colorado was a major river, right? This was a highway of commerce.
It was.
Yeah, speaking of highway of commerce, so was it hard to find, I have two questions. Was it some of the maps that you showed, like the map of the steamboat landings in the 1850s and 1860s, were those maps hard to come by? You mentioned one person that had shared some maps with you, but were the others, was that part difficult? And then the second part of my question was, can you just repeat what you said at the beginning about can you repeat the story of how this started? Again, the person that approached you with the map, can you just share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So my buddy Dave Finnern, who you saw here in the pictures, he was president of both the California Wreck Divers and the Adventurers Club here, and remains a good friend today. But he came up with this map that he found, I think maybe got from another member of the Wreck Divers, Herb, and showed it to me, and it's like, look at this. There's some old seaport on there that nobody knows about, no one's ever been to. We gotta go check it out. I'm like, well, yeah, let's go check it out. And so this kind of started off on a 13-year quest, kind of on and off. And
But he got the map from someone else in the
Yes,
dive club.
and the one you see here, I recently downloaded from the Coast Guard. They have our cobble maps there too. So it's been on the map for some time, since 1973. It's just not something that someone's ever gone back to, or only a handful of people have ever, trekked to that location. And it's not that far away. I mean, if it was hard packed, you usually drive down to it. But just the mud and everything just makes it very difficult to get to. I'm sorry, was it the second question?
The second part was of some of the maps you had to find, like the steamboat landings of the 1850s. Were those maps hard to come by or available online? Or
Yeah, different sources. They're not too hard to come by, but what you'll find is kind of like a generic location. Like if you looked at some of the maps in the presentation, little dots, and it's like, okay, this is the approximate location. If you want to try to nail one of those down today, you may have a swath of a mile or two to go look, and what you might find is there could be something there. There could be a natural a pinnacle or rock landing, or you could have some pilings, or there could be nothing. So there is, it's part of our Southwest history that not people really think of. You think of steamers, you think of the Mississippi River.
Right.
You don't really think of the Colorado River. They had 30 steamers there, and they had a lot of mining activity. They had, I think, it was like almost 2,000 mines up and down the 700 claims and 2,000 miners in the diggings back in the 1860s. So we had food, supplies. You saw the big cases there of dynamite. All the supplies were primarily shipped via the river. Now they had overland shipping, but as you know, you have to go through the Mojave Desert. And you have about 100 miles or if not more of dry desert, no water.
Yeah.
During the summer. So the Colorado River was, anywhere in the world, rivers were the highways at that period in time.
So rivers normally move around a lot and bury what used to be there, and this hasn't. Is that because we sucked all the water out of the Colorado, or why are these things not buried by silt?
You find the same thing on the Missouri and the Mississippi. They've extensively changed the course. In fact, there's a shipwreck that Gene and I visited, or a museum to it. Yeah, exactly, Steamfield, the cornfield, where it wrecked and the river subsequently changed course and it filled up and it was later turned into a cornfield. So yeah, when it's flat and it's like silty, when you have something like the Grand Canyon, that's not going to move because you have obviously a rock canyon there. But when you're in a very flat area where it's just dirt and the river just kind of meanders all over the place.
Yeah, I think it was 1911. The Colorado actually broke its banks and created the Salton Sea. There actually used to be a lake there, but so you already had the depression of the lake. And I think for 2 years it flowed into, what's now the Salton Sea before they built up dikes and, redirected the river. But throughout that lower part of the Colorado River, those lower probably 150, 200 miles, it did change its course quite a bit. We were talking about the Explorer. The Explorer, when the Cocopah Indians refound her, was 20 miles from the current river at that time. That's how much the river wanders and meanders then. But ultimately, the confluence is at the same place, at that island, Montague, and that lower region then. Okay.
One more.
I just want to thank you for such a eloquent talk and really thought-provoking. I've spent a lot of time in Baja and a lot of time on the Colorado River, and I think you really captured a lot of the mystery of both places and helped me really think about both of them in ways I hadn't before, and just really thank both of you for really giving me new perspective on both places tonight. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there's a lot of history there. So.